Excellent. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's session, which is focused on MLC's Manufacturing in 2030 project and the recently released survey results from the Manufacturing in 2030, A Lens on the Future survey. My name is Lauren Bissett, and I'm a part of the Manufacturing Leadership Council team here at the NAM. Now, before we begin the call, I have just a few housekeeping items. The first thing is that we ask you as you enter to please mute your line so that we're able to maintain sound quality throughout the session. So if you can do that now, that would be wonderful. And to start, as a participant, if you could turn your camera off during the panel discussion, that would be wonderful, as we'll have a better view of our moderator and panelists. And in order for you guys to have the best viewing, at the top of your screen, there's a drop down that you should see that has your view options of view everyone who's talking or active cameras, or view no one. I definitely suggest don't do view no one. But if you view active cameras, you'll have a focus on the panelist and our moderator. During the Q&A, we are very happy to have you turn on your camera, unmute, and ask questions. And of course, speaking of Q&A, as we go through the session itself, please feel free to place any questions you have in the chat, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll do our best to address all of your questions during the session or during the Q&A portion. And lastly, this session is going to be recorded and will be available on the Manufacturing Leadership Council website within 5 to 7 business days. So now, let me introduce our moderator, MLC's co-founder, vice president, and executive director, Mr. David Brosell. David, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lauren, and welcome everyone to today's session as part of our Manufacturing in 2030 project. We specifically call it a project because it is not a discrete moment in time. It is a year-long attempt to help manufacturers understand what might be around the corner in terms of how they operate their businesses and how they operate their production facilities. We learned from the pandemic that agility, flexibility are really critical to dealing with disruptions. And it kind of influenced our thinking with regard to putting this project together back in 2021, that we needed to really stop and look forward and to see what might be around the corner with regard to the trends shaping our industry. And therefore, we launched the project in December of 2021 with a conference in New Orleans based around the 2030 theme. So all during this year, we have been delivering a variety of subject matters with regard to the 2030 project, webinars, discussions we've been having about some of these future trends. We released our Manufacturing in 2030 white paper, the next phase of digital evolution, a couple of months ago. I hope you've all gotten that and have spent time reading it, because I think it is a great view on what future trends, how they may play out going forward. And with this call today, we're releasing the results of a survey we've done with all of you on what your attitudes and perspectives are with regard to those future trends. We had 260 respondents to this survey. They are very interesting. We're only going to get at some of them, but you're going to be able to read the full report once we send it out to you. And it's interesting because this is not just crystal ball gazing. You have told us, as a result of the survey, about your own strategic planning horizons with regard to the future. And very interestingly, nearly 1/4 of the survey respondents say they are planning 5 to 10 years out. About 9% have strategic planning horizons of longer than 10 years. And the sweet spot, 2 to 5 years as a planning horizon, represents about 56% of the respondents. So the people who are part of this project, our council members and others are already thinking very deeply about 2030 and the trends that are driving manufacturing and will drive
Manufacturing 2030,
manufacturing in
MLC,
the
Lens of the
in,
Future.
we're having a little echo here. Um, about the trends that are driving manufacturing toward the future. So, what we're looking at today are very practical considerations that manufacturers are having with regard to these trends and how it's going to shape their businesses going forward. So, let me introduce the panel now, and we'll get started on some of our survey results, but as Lauren did, I want to thank our partners. If you want to go back one slide, Lauren, I want to thank our partners, EY, Infor, Entity Data, and West Monroe for supporting this project, but also participating in the development of the survey research and providing insights to us as we shape that instrument that you've all responded to going forward. So we really appreciate the efforts you all put into this and your support of the project, which all of us will benefit from. So next slide, please, Lauren. So let me introduce our panelists now. Dennis McCrae, I'll start with you. You are the Senior Partner and Practice Leader, Consumer and Industrial Products at West Monroe. Thanks for joining us today. Sharak Rathi, who is the Senior Director, Industry and Solution Strategy at Infor. Uh, Thanks for joining us today. Greg Wagner, who is the data-driven manufacturing leader at EY, a very interesting title and certainly reflects the focus around M4.0 and digitization. And Zoe Zach Cuny, I'm sorry I've butchered that, Joe, but Vice President, Manufacturing Industry Consulting and Digital Transformation at NTT Data. So thank you all for being part of the panel today. I'm sure the audience is very interested to hear your insights and perspectives on the survey research and what you're thinking about that. So Lauren, I think we're ready to start our discussion. So our first survey result, let me give you a little bit background about this. We're seeing here that 84% expect the pace of digital adoption to accelerate throughout the decade. This follows, and it's a continuation of something we started to see in June of 2020 as the pandemic was starting to rear its ugly head. At that time, we noticed that we were doing survey research at that point to see what the effect of the pandemic was going to be on manufacturing 4.0. And in June of that year, we noticed a sizable number of our respondents, our council members, more than half, indicating they were going to accelerate their adoption of manufacturing 4.0 technologies in order to equip them to deal with disruption, in order them to pivot their production facilities, to become more agile and more flexible as the pandemic was really starting to take hold. We followed that up with several other surveys into 2021, all of which, to one degree or another, confirm the trend of this acceleration. Now, this new survey is showing that over the next 10 years, out to 2030, a huge majority is expecting that acceleration to continue throughout the decade. And there's a number of reasons for it, as we're going to discuss going forward, but the momentum is clear. And I think it's clear to manufacturers that digital adoption is no longer debatable. It's no longer should be considered an option. It is something everybody has to do to remain competitive and to ensure the agility and flexibility that they need to deal with whatever upcoming disruptions the industry may face going forward. Nobody wants to be caught, as many were as the pandemic was starting, in a disadvantageous position with regard to their competitors and with regard to their own health to deal with disruption. So let's go to our first question surrounding this data point we've gotten out of the surveys. So we've seen the 84%. We know that going forward, as we move into the next phase of manufacturing 4.0, that the trajectory of digital adoption is going to get steeper, that the pilot projects, the small projects that manufacturers have undertaken around M4.0, as they attempt to scale these projects more toward an enterprise play, are going to get more difficult. So, panel, my question to you is: how do you see this playing out? This expected acceleration of digital adoption playing out to 2030, and what do you think manufacturers are going to have to do to deal with that more pronounced trajectory that I think we would all agree is going to take place? So let me start with Dennis McCrae of West Monroe and get your perspective on this, Dennis. What do you think are the chief areas of focus that manufacturers should have to optimize this acceleration in their own companies?
Yeah, thank you, David. As we look across the market and we look at companies that we work with and other companies, I think the rate of acceleration really depends upon the size of the company. So, as we look at mid-market companies, for example, when I say mid-market, call it about a half a billion in revenue to, maybe 3 billion in revenue. We're still seeing, a slow adoption amongst those companies. And in fact, I would say within the current, worldly environment and inflationary pressures that we have, a lot of those investments are being kind of either put on the back burner or not as accelerated as you would think to maintain competitiveness. Now, when you look at more of the larger enterprise, type businesses, kind of $5 billion plus, we see a lot of acceleration there, and a lot of efforts being put there. I think, just given the the worldly environment that we're facing, there's a lot of uncertainty out there right now. So, but I think in terms of what can manufacturers be doing, the biggest one we would say is, if you haven't started in a meaningful way to start your manufacturing 4.0 journey, now is the time to do it to maintain that competitiveness. We and I have a big belief that those companies that don't engage in manufacturing 4.0, both internally and externally, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in one of the other questions, but it's they're not going to have the competitiveness to be able to compete coming out of this next recessionary cycle. So I think one thing, if you haven't done this in a meaningful way, one of the first things you can do is really establish a team focused on digitals with the right leaders, the right innovators, and also the right disruptors, right? Like the right people in the business that can really challenge and do what leadership needs to get done. The other thing is find these, the use cases that are going to help drive your digital evolution, both on the shop floor and commercially. How do you actually drive more revenue through digital and analytics? And then I think, if you're already, one of these enterprise clients that's making great progress and really committed to driving manufacturing 4.0, it's the big thing then is really thinking about how do you scale and get these pilots out. So you're putting them across your network, realizing that value as quickly as possible. And then just quickly, I think the other part of the discussion is, as part of manufacturing 4.0, we should also be, it's all driven by data and analytics. And so as we think about the data that's resonant within the business, resonant within the products, how do we monetize that data? So can we create smart products, new revenue streams to upsell clients, those kind of things to help really drive more revenue at the top line also. So I think it kind of depends upon where you are in the journey. Like when we look at the bigger enterprise clients, there's more data monetization opportunities. Kind of more mid-market, it's more about getting manufacturing 4.0 going and getting those proof of values kind of scaled across the business.
You make a lot of good points there, Dennis. And certainly we have been here at MLC very sensitive to what we call the digital divide. between the large and the small and medium-sized companies, and it's very true that there are different paces. The industry is certainly not monolithic
Yeah.
with regard to the adoption of this. But what I'm gleaning from your response is that your interpretation of that 84% is that lots of people may be looking at it and say, yes, it's definitely going to accelerate, but not everyone, or not even me as a respondent, is going to be able to do it as fast as others. And I think that's a key point. But let me turn it to Greg at EY and get his perspective and see if he has kind of the same view as you do or a different view. Greg?
Yeah, thank you. So, I very much agree with everything that Dennis had said. And, what we're finding as we talk to a lot of our clients is, they want to adopt digital. They want to become more data centric. The trouble they're having is how do they really get the buy-in from the organization to start moving in that direction? The technology teams want to accelerate, but the business teams tend to want to kind of dig their heels in a little bit and keep with the status quo to some extent. And what we do to kind of help them work through that is help them think about this, now, next, and beyond perspective, right? What do we need to do now? What should we be doing next? And then what is it that we're really trying to work towards in the future? Managing this, what we call this duality of growth, right? How do we make sure we're thinking about the capabilities we need in 2030 and investing in the right things to get there? But how are we making sure that we're focusing on the near-term needs and the value we can create today, tying these digital transformations to tangible business outcomes and capabilities that are going to help to solve problems while investing in that future differentiation we're trying to make as an organization to really outpace our competitors. And so there's a lot of conversations we have with them thinking through what that looks like. And then as they look to try to build out their digital roadmap, they're very focused on use cases and how they can capture some of that value. And what we tend to find is there's a lot of gap in near-term infrastructure capabilities. As the pandemic has forced a lot of companies to start thinking about nearshoring back in the U.S., back in North America, some of those facilities have really been neglected. And so being able to capitalize on those use cases and the new capabilities, they're finding they have to back up a little bit and understand, can we actually connect our equipment? Can we capitalize on that data that Dennis was talking about? We can't actually access it right now and get the right information to drive the types of improvements that are going to create the value that we need. And so we're helping a lot of organizations right now close that gap that they need in order to get to those larger capabilities that they're really hoping to get. And then another area that we see a lot of focus on right now because of the pandemic, some of the things that are happening with energy management in China and other locations is how can organizations better balance their production capabilities across different locations as they expect these supply chain disruptions to continue. And so having that end-to-end longer-term visibility of what's going on in individual facilities, how they can actually balance and leverage the existing facilities they have, where they might have to think about reinvesting in something different, has been a really big focus for them as well, to help them get to moving towards scale. We've seen that people have put in a lot of pilots. There's a lot of pilot purgatory, and it's because they struggle with how does this lead to what they're really trying to achieve long term, and focusing on some of those lower level technology capabilities is critical to getting to that next level of focus.
Yeah, very interesting points. It's why are we getting this echo here? Very interesting points, Greg. And it's almost a historical debating point in the sense of, do you build brick by brick and build the business case for these big transformations, or do you try for a great leap forward, so to speak, to try to outrun the competition? I think we've had this through many phases of technology. Maybe it still exists with this one. I'd love to hear from the other panelists, their perspective on that. But I'd also like to hear whether all of you are sensing at this point there's some hesitation starting to take root here because of concerns about inflation and the direction of the economy in 2023. So let me go to Shirag at Infor and get your perspective on the data point about the acceleration. Maybe you could address a couple of the others as well.
Sure, happy to do that. So if you give you a perspective, right? Before the pandemic, the spend, if you look at the IT spend reports of Carter and IDC, they were projecting that the IT spend on digital transformation related initiatives was growing at about 10 to 11%. And then after the pandemic hit, the pace of investments accelerated. So most analyst firms are projecting 16 to 17% CAGR growth for digital transformation specific spend, at least for the next 5 to 6 years. They don't go as far as 2030, at least 2025, 2026, they're projecting about 16% CAGR growth rate on digital transformation spend, so which is substantial. So to give you another perspective, cumulatively that adds up to about 8 to 10 trillion dollars of spend specifically on digital transformation in the next 4 to 5 years, which, given the current circumstances, they haven't diluted the forecast as yet. So that means that the spend on the digital transformation will only continue to accelerate. But last 2 to 3 years, especially in response to the pandemic, most of the companies were kind of scrambling to put these digital transformation projects together in response to what they can do and to keep the lights on as far as operations are concerned and make remote operations happen, etc. I think the next 3 to 4 years will be where most of the consequential decisions will be made in terms of where people will invest on as far as digital transformation is concerned. And that will set the pace for where we as a sector, industrial manufacturing, is going to be by 2030. So I think the more important decisions are going to be made in the next 2 to 3 years. And you're right also on the point that last 3 years of results of digital transformation relative initiatives, some of these have been very underwhelming, I guess, for some of the organizations. But I think
Mhm.
one point is clear that if companies start focusing on this digital spend and digital transformation related spending as a means to create assets, which are proprietary assets, could be software, could be apps, could be data analytics, etc., as opposed to just using it as a means to reduce cost and gain operational excellence. I think that's a learning, lesson, if you like, in the last 3 years. The second point is that the focus should now be shifted towards figuring out how do you use digital transformation and digitization as a strategic differentiation, whether it comes to customer innovation or whether a customer experience or innovation. So I think if you start looking at with that mindset, there are some lessons that we've learned in the last 3 years that need to be applied at least for the bigger decisions that are going to be made in the next 3 to 4 years, so that we set ourselves for success by 2030. So I think those would be my thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, very, very interesting points. Kind of reconfirms my feeling that the higher you climb, the tougher the climb gets going forward. And very interesting that a lot of the decisions that are going to have to be made are going to have long-term ramifications based on the decisions made in the next couple of years. So yeah, very interesting. Let's hear from Joe at NTT Data about you've had the benefit now of hearing from three of your colleagues on the panel. Joe, how would you like to respond to some of the points that have been made?
Um, it's not always good to go last, right? I'd like, I will not echo all the valid points that were made, and I agree with all of them. What I would say though is that when you look at, um, the needs for operations and supply chains to continue to take cost out, to create fuel to grow the company, and everybody is focused on the customer, and we need more agility. Working through that process to take cost out has been a well-defined process, right? You look at what the capability of the organization, the assets you have is, you understand what you're delivering given the realities of daily operations, and you try to close the gap between what is possible and how you're currently performing. I believe that as we work through investments in digitization, the key is don't lose sight of where those performance gaps are, because that's where you want to focus your energy. Getting through the pilot is the easy part. Most of those are success stories, but operationalizing the pilots is where I think the secret sauce is. I think it's spending the time with the people and the process on the floor, those that need to use the digitization to make them better at doing what their role is, to empower them to move the needle forward in terms of uh, the business system. I think that's where the secret sauce is. I don't think we can lose sight of spending time with the people to get them to see how these innovations will create value, allow them to do their job better, allow them to have career growth. So agree with everything that was said. I think that the accelerator is engaging the employees with with an understanding of what their role is and how the digitization will help them.
Yeah, and the more we can identify best practices around the operational aspects that you mentioned, the better for the whole industry to learn how to do this in an effective manner. Let's move to our next question, Lauren, if you would. And this is a really interesting finding about the industry's perspective on whether we're going to be able to embrace autonomous operations in the future, and to what extent. As you see by the survey result, 58% of the respondents have autonomous operations on their radar screens, with different levels of expectation, as evidenced by the bar graph. Most expect that this is pretty far off yet, but we shall see about that. One of the sessions we are going to be having at our December conference on AI in Nashville is a presentation by Yokogawa of a successful field trial they announced in March of this year, in which they ran a chemical plant for 35 consecutive days autonomously. So proof points are starting to emerge on this, but I want to get the panel's perspectives on this autonomy subject. So if we could go to the question, Lauren, is this a trend you see that's gaining momentum, that has some inexorability about it? And if so, is this a desirable thing? Do we want to move toward autonomous operations, or a little short of that, perhaps, um, at different companies and different configurations of production? So let me start with Shirag at Infor on this one and get your perspective on this subject of autonomous operations.
Thanks, David. So the way I see it, the desire for autonomous operations in industrial manufacturing is not new, right? The first time we heard lights out factory, it was the 1980s when GM was considering this as a strategy to thwart the Japanese competition. So ever since robots started making an appearance, people started visioning how you could have a completely autonomous factory that could run on its own and would require minimal to no human intervention as well. And to that extent, people have made some great strides in that particular arena. What has been game changer is specifically the deep learning and self-learning algorithms on the machine learning side. And that coupled with now what is digital twin, modeling simulation tools, blockchain, and even autonomous transportation, which is forthcoming in the next 5 to 6 years, we can see this to be completely a game changer as far as industrial manufacturing is concerned, where we will start having a lot of modularity, flexibility as far as industrial manufacturing is concerned. So we at Infor are also building several use cases where you can take the human out of the loop for several of the routine manufacturing related tasks, whether it's financial management or whether it's operations management, etc. But that said, full autonomy, the cost of doing full autonomy in most industrial manufacturing processes might be, I guess, too high, and something given the current circumstances, probably not justifiable. So you will have part autonomy in several manufacturing arenas where the business case makes sense, but it will be a decision made on case to case base. And probably I would think that to desire completely autonomous operations in all aspects of manufacturing sometimes might be really cost prohibitive. So those are my thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, very, very interesting. But it sounds like you kind of feel that it is at least theoretically an achievable goal technologically.
It is given the tools and the ingredients that are needed to make autonomy happen. They are already available, and plus all the enabling technologies that are needed for autonomy to become a reality are also developing very, very rapidly. So the entire ecosystem by itself is, I guess, taking shape very, very rapidly. But that said, sometimes the cost of incorporating that technology in standard manufacturing processes might be cost prohibitive. So you have to make a case by case decision. At what point in time there's justification to aim for full autonomy of operations.
Let's go to Joe at NTT Data. We won't put you last on this one, Joe. You could be at bat now on this. Do you agree with what we just heard, or do you have a different perspective?
No, I do agree. I do believe that that um, autonomous operations is inexorable trend, right? It will happen. I don't believe it'll happen by 2030. I think we're a long way off from seeing it materialize. And, we can see that if we look back in time. Well, the adoption rate of digital technologies is accelerating. Some of the more, you know, um, self-driving cars, we're still working at it, right? And it'll be a long time before we get all the social, regulatory, and economic impacts of that sort of worked out, right? I believe when you move into industrial manufacturing plants where we still have lots of legacy equipment, not, these are not new factories, that completely converting all this equipment and machines to 100% computer controlled will be cost prohibitive. Um, with that said, between now and 2030, I expect the automation to continue. I do expect that you'll have elements of autonomy running in our manufacturing facilities. And we at NTT Data have a number of projects that are in the works to, help to deliver to our customers against those expectations of how do we take um, jobs that we can't hire people for and get um, compute and software to to take the lead and help minimize the impact of uh, a shortage of worker and talent.
Okay, Greg at EY, an inexorable trend or one that we've got to take a little bit more nuanced view on, as the other two panelists have indicated.
I do feel like the train has left the station, right? Like as everybody else has said, and we are moving that direction. There's use cases all around already where people are doing this in factories, right? Whether it's around material movements and prefabrication, more of the lower skilled type of tasks that need to get done. I think the main question we have to really ask ourselves as we think about moving to autonomous operations is what is it that we're really trying to achieve with it, right? Are we trying to deal with labor shortages? Are we trying to get more repeatable production? Is it about driving more throughput because we can run on different schedules without relying on shift schedules of manpower? What is it that we want to achieve rather than just we're trying to go do this because it's the next thing that we should do? And I think everybody else mentioned this, but the cost is obviously significant, and there's equipment costs, but we see with every technology over time the costs come down, it becomes more manageable and easier to do. But some of the other hidden costs, like the additional maintenance costs of maintaining this equipment, the need to have more advanced OT organizations with higher skilled labor to maintain and make sure that these machine learning algorithms and this equipment is working properly, and even the concern around if you're fully autonomous, does it sometimes lead to more rigidity, and it's difficult to achieve that speed and agility we're really looking for, and that flexibility in manufacturing, right? So I think we have to find the balance between each of those things before we really push towards fully autonomous. I don't think we'll get there in most industries. Maybe there's some where it can happen. We've seen Tesla try to fully automate a plant, and then they were making cars in the parking lot because everything broke, right? So I think there's always going to be a balance of how you need to utilize the right type of skilled labor, and where can you supplement or replace where it's lower skilled or less critical, perhaps.
Yeah. And my own personal feeling is that even if we could, we still need to have people in there and exercising human judgment on these things. I don't think we'll ever see a substitute for that, at least in my lifetime.
David, with your permission, a follow-on question,
Yeah.
if I can ask to the panelists, like, do you see the desire for autonomous operations more on the process manufacturing or on discrete manufacturing? Any thoughts on that? Like, process is certainly, and like I've looked at process, the Yokogawa case study that David mentioned earlier, and some of the others from ABB, and also other organizations who are trying to make level 5 autonomy in major chemical plants and petrochemical plants. Just thoughts whether it's more of a desire on the process side or on the discrete side of manufacturing.
Yeah, it's a good question. Anybody have a perspective on that?
I'll jump in on that quickly.
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I was going to say very quickly, I think from a process side, it's an easier leap to get to there than in the discrete side. So I think there's a much bigger push and desire in the process side, but I also think because there's already so much automation and things happening, that their labor usage is lower. So the value for them driving there is a lot less than in discrete manufacturing, but I think there's a much further road to try to get past in order to make it work for discrete.
Dennis?
Sorry, Dennis, go ahead.
No, Greg hit it spot on with what I was going to say, right? Like the process industry is much more advanced in their digital architecture and automation, and they've been doing it for years. So they're much more mature in being able to be positioned for autonomous. So I mean, what Greg said was spot on.
Yeah, we'll make sure we continue that discussion in Nashville, because I think it's going to be high on the radar screens. Let's go to our next question. We're kind of running out of time here. And that's AI. A huge majority in the poll, 76%, say that the industry needs a code of ethics governing its use. We don't see this with other technologies. And that the industry itself should take the lead in devising it. What are your thoughts about this, and what might a code of conduct look like? Let me start with Joe at NDT Data.
Very good, thank you. So the first question, do I agree that we need a code of ethics? Yes, I do, we do at NTT Data, right? So given that when we just got done talking about autonomous operation, we're talking about using the computers to assist humans in the near term, but eventually maybe to replace workers where it makes sense. And given that we have a code of ethics for how our corporations run and how our governments run, to imagine that we're going to write software to do the same things that a human does without a code of ethics, a lot of things can go wrong, right? So I think with any transformation, you start with where you are, where you want to be, and there's the barriers and unintended consequences of getting there that we have to overcome. And I think a code will be important. Do I believe that that industry needs to take a lead? Absolutely. But I think that the industry will take a lead, governments will engage, academia will have a part in it, private sector and the service sectors will all participate in the near term in making sure that we get this right. The natural question would be, why is this so important? Well, the rate at which computers can process data, and with the the continued exponential growth of data, you can easily see how some of the unintended consequences could be biases, whether it be biases in race, it could be safety in our manufacturing facilities because of a cyber attack or an adversarial attack on your systems. It could be related to anomalies, which would, cause you to do the wrong thing. So I know we're short on time here, but I'm a huge fan of a code of ethics. Developers have to be trained and educated in it. Procedures will need to be put in place to make sure that we're complying to it. And we need to make sure that the software that we are releasing is, fair, reliable, explainable, takes data protection and government regulations into consideration, and is focused on the well-being of society. A lot of words quickly there, David.
No, very, very good and very comprehensive. Anybody else like to offer a view on this relatively quickly?
I
If
think
not,
what
we can all signal our agreement by putting up our hands.
yeah, I think that was really good.
Okay, let's move to the next question. I think that's pretty overwhelming. And this has to do with the perennial and persistent issue of the workforce and talent shortages and skill shortages in manufacturing. The poll shows that manufacturers expect the severe workforce issue that's been in effect as long as I've been in manufacturing to continue through 2030. It is nearly 20 points higher than the second finding, which was around cybersecurity. What can we do? We're doing so many things already to try to deal with this issue. The NAM, for example, has had its Creators Wanted campaign on the road now for well over a year. It started before the pandemic, had to be interrupted, of course, but has been um, uh, in effect for quite a while. Our next stop is going to be at the Rockwell Automation Fair in Chicago later this month. We're trying to change perceptions of manufacturing as an industry and get more young people and their parents associated with a positive idea about manufacturing. What else can we do as an industry to deal with this issue as we look forward to 2030, as we think about digital perhaps as a way to change perceptions and engage more young people? Let's start with Greg at EY on this one.
Yeah, David, I think you make great points there. And, I think the first thing we have to do is, as you just described, we need to make manufacturing, more interesting. I grew up in manufacturing. I think all of us here really enjoy it, but, it doesn't have a great image. It's dirty, it's loud, it's, physically intensive at times. The new generation of people that are out there that we really need to attract into manufacturing, right? We've all heard this before, right? Everybody wants a company and an organization with a purpose, right? The old adage of being a cathedral maker and not a bricklayer, right? So how can we start to, change the messaging around what it is we're doing as manufacturers, how we enable the great things that people love in their lives, right? Require manufacturing to be a part of that. So how do we start shifting from a quote unquote necessary evil to a real value add for, the communities and for society, right? And when we think about individuals in particular, we need to change the way we're thinking about manufacturing labor and it not just being around folks that have specific skills in assembling parts or things like that. We recently published a report on the 8 adaptive skills that we really feel manufacturing needs going forward. And they're much broader than what you would consider in basic manufacturing, right? It's things like analytical acumen, business acumen, creative reasoning, learning agility, resilience to continue solving problems, having social and emotional intelligence to work with other people, having broader systems thinking. So I'm not just doing my one part, but how am I a part of a larger kind of ecosystem? And then some basic things, even like root cause analysis, so that people can really get to solving problems and doing things in the right way. So I think if we're going to address the shortage, if we're just trying to find more people to come do what we've always done, I think we're going to struggle with that. If we change the paradigm in what we're looking for and the types of job experiences we can give people, use all this automation technology we're talking about to get rid of some of those menial tasks that people don't enjoy and free up their capacity to focus on bigger problem solving, more impactful type of roles, I think that's going to really start to attract people and start to soften some of that gap we see right now in hiring.
Yeah, those are all really good points. Dennis, I know you're passionate about this subject. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and I know we're getting short on time here, so I'll go pretty quickly. But I think the point that was interesting from the survey is that 72% of those who responded said they will address labor shortages with automation. So, kind of going back to, autonomous factories, in the point that you made, David, there's always going to need to be people engaged in these factories. And the biggest thing that I see, or we see, even as we go towards more automation, is unplanned downtime. I mean, we talk about capacity utilization, rate, quality, downtime, right? But the downtime component is the one that plagues most organizations. So as you think about that, as you put in more automation, you got to keep that automation running and running effectively. So part of that is, as Greg was mentioning too, is bringing in the right skill sets, right? And understanding what are those skill sets going to need to be in the future, and be able to recruit and maintain those levels. But I do believe automation is going to become, more of a solution here, but you have to be ready to be able to maintain that automation in that environment.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the sake of time, let's move to our next question, Lauren, which is a kind of a big question. And that is what outcomes people are looking for from their digital transformation investments out to 2030. And as you can see by this graph, a very strong majority cite greater speed and flexibility as the most desired outcomes, as well as financial returns. Those are the top three, as well as greater customer satisfaction. Some of these, of course, have become normal talking points. We use them all the time. Greater speed and flexibility. But what does this all mean if this is what they're looking for? And what actions do manufacturers need to take now? You can move to the next slide, Lauren, to achieve them. If that's what we're looking for as goals by 2030, greater speed and flexibility right at the top. What does the panel think about this? Let me start with Greg at EY for some views on what manufacturers need to do now to get to that goal.
Yeah, I'll hit on this one relatively quickly. So I think when we talk about speed and flexibility, what people really want is responsiveness, right? They want to be able to respond to changing demands from their customers, or from changes in the market, or from disruptions that we've seen in supply chain, or excuse me, with things like COVID. And that speed and flexibility, those are enablers to allow that responsiveness. And to start to get there, we need to think about how we can drive more efficiency in our plants to reduce the time for changeovers, how we can start to improve procurement practices so that we address some of the material issues that we're seeing right now. Think about some of the upfront stuff like planning and scheduling so that we can better enable our factories to be successful instead of relying on them to constantly have to adapt. And as we look to try to capitalize on markets, we need to do a better job of breaking down some of the barriers we have in our functional teams within manufacturing companies, right? So how do we connect our market teams and our innovation teams with manufacturing so we can accelerate some of the vertical startup of new products to get them out to market faster, right? Right now there's a lot of throwing things over the fence and things don't work, and there's a lot of back and forth that happen. And the last thing I'll say, and I mentioned this earlier, is if we really want to be able to respond quicker, we need to know what's going on, and we need to invest in better end-to-end visibility of what's happening within our factories, but then also what's happening across our network, right? What's going on with issues in ports, what's happening globally, so that we can be more adaptive and have the right insights to try to drive that change. So those are three areas I think are going to be super critical in the near term.
Yeah, that's really good. What I'm hearing is, here we go with that echo again. What I'm hearing is sense, respond, and orchestrate. But let's hear from Dennis McCrae at West Monroe about your perspective on this, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you, David. I mean, I think what we're seeing in the marketplace is a focus on that customer satisfaction and getting towards higher financial returns. And companies that are digital are looking to really monetize their data. And what I mean by that is looking at their data, both internally and how it's used externally by customers, and how can they use that data to improve how they run the operations internally, but at the same time, What can they do externally to drive uplift in sales? So cross-selling, helping clients come in and understand how they can buy things for their equipment that will make it perform better. Reusables that need to come back into their equipment, et cetera. So I would say there's a big opportunity for manufacturers on the manufacturing 4.0 journey in terms of connecting with their customers, building that client experience, and really monetizing a lot of the data that's already in the business, right? Can we use it to run the business better? Can we use it to engage our clients better and upsell? And that's what we're seeing a lot of clients do these days in terms of that side. So it's a little bit of a different spin than focusing fully on the operations, but expands out to the customer side also.
Yeah, very interesting. We have one more question from the survey to go over, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions, but let's try to get through it quickly. And this is one of my favorite findings. We've been asking this question for many, many, many years about M4.0, and that is, and the finding is showing that a majority of respondents say by 2030, digital will be a game changer for the industry, not just something that is significant but not transformative, but a real game changer. Do you agree? And what does that game look like? What is the competitive edge or the competitive differentiator that you think will really amount to that game changer by 2030? Let's start with Chirag at Infor. I think you're on mute.
Sorry. So by 2030, right, you would certainly be, I guess, closer to the Industry 5.0 paradigm, right? So while Industry 4.0 has been languishing for a long time, we would certainly believe that all the necessary ingredients that are necessary, I guess, for Industry 5.0 to happen will certainly become available by that time. So the focus of the manufacturing would shift from just focusing on connecting machines to delivering more better customer experience, from mass customization, which is all the rage today, to more of hyper customization and then focusing on creating that batch of one or two products. And then from intelligent supply chains to focus more on responsive and distributed supply chains and stuff like that. So I think the level of product, the level of technologies, and the level of manufacturing capabilities all will basically be transformed by the year 2030. We have certainly got a lot of the raw materials and the ingredients necessary to make that transformation happen specifically. And I think that will be my answer to the question that, certainly, you'll have a lot of transformative changes as far as manufacturing is concerned by that particular time period.
Okay, Dennis, what's your view? We've heard hyper customization. We've heard about responsive supply chains. Business model innovation is on the radar. What's
I,
your view?
I would agree. I think it's all on the table, right? Like in terms of where manufacturers are going and to be, remain competitive, digital is going to be table stakes. And it's more than just a game changer. If you want to play and actually be in existence, 10 years from now, my take on it is those companies that are not digital will not be able to compete. So I
Yeah.
think, it's great to see what this project does in terms of 2030. It's great to bring these panelists together and have these points of view, but, and to be able to help support and drive these discussions, right? Because I think without digital, I'll be surprised if companies, that don't embrace in digital really exist over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, very interesting. I completely agree with you. It's now the high school diploma.
You have to have it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's Lauren Bissett. Let's open it up to the audience and take some questions.
Yeah,
I
certainly.
presume we have some.
We definitely have some questions, and if someone would like to, unmute and ask, I have a few here. By all means, one that I want to address, Paul Menning asked where we can get the information on the 8 needs for future employees in manufacturing that Greg was talking about, and we'll make sure we can get a copy of that and send that out. I assume, Greg, you have no problem with that.
It should be fine. Yeah, I'll confirm.
All right, perfect. Thanks. So we'll make sure we handle that. But let's go back to the beginning. And Philip had a question on the first point that we were talking about on, do you see a challenge with digital acumen at various leadership levels?
Who would like to take a shot at that one? Just raise your hand.
We see it all the time, quite
Dennis?
honestly. Yeah, I mean, we see it all the time, and it's a challenge in terms of getting everybody on the same page, with the same vernacular, so they can understand their data assets to data products and how they actually manage those within the business.
All right. Anybody else on this one? If not,
I would just say agree with that as well. And I think it's not just around different levels, but also across functions. You have a wide array of what they really understand that digital can do for them and how to apply it.
Well,
yeah.
and just to that point, especially when you have multiple business units, right? Like trying to get multiple business units to come together and have a common way to manage their digital strategy.
Interesting. Okay, next question, Lauren.
All right, so Matthew asked, when building a team for digital capabilities, could you comment on hiring between one, an individual with a digital background, and then train them toward being an SME, versus two, an individual with a strong subject matter expert background and training them to use digital tools?
Okay, that's a good one. Who would like to take a shot at that? Anyone?
I think it's the type of project that determines how you resource and staff those projects, right? So if the domain expertise is the primary requirement of the project, then you have to recruit somebody who has a very, very strong domain expertise and train him up to become the citizen data scientist. And then fundamentally, if data scientist is who you need, then you need to hire a data scientist and then educate him on the domain specific requirements. So it's the kind of project that will determine, the kind of resource that you go after. But I think we are also seeing the rise of data scientists and citizen data scientists in several organizations. A lot of DIY products becoming available, and they will certainly become more prevalent by 2030, where people with subject matter expertise can basically design and develop their own data science projects. So I think I would rate subject matter expertise higher on the demand, metric as far as the requirements are concerned, as opposed to
Okay.
having data science knowledge.
Okay. We have time for one more question, Lauren, and then we can wrap up.
Okay.
We are at 2 minutes of.
And anyone that didn't get their questions answered, we'll do our best to get a response to you. We'll take a copy of this, but we'll go to Steve's question. For companies that need to slow down digital due to the current economic realities, what things should be focused on, not totally lost ground, so that when investments restart, they are not back to ground zero?
Good question. Who would like to take that one? That's a good one. Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, if
Yeah.
no one else, okay, go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, right? I think that digital adoption is really a people play right now. So slowing investments down in, actually automating something shouldn't stop us from truly understanding, again, today's current performance, what it's capable of, how you're performing, and what the opportunity is to improve it. In many cases, you can do that with lightweight systems to get the organization understanding how they can use data to drive improvements. And when they turn the funding back on, then you can start to automate it and operationalize it so that you can extend it across, more than one line, one location, or one facility. So I'd stay focused on people and process, because ultimately that's what you're going to end up automating.
Yeah, just to build upon that quickly too, Joe, I would recommend that you can't quit your digital investments, right? Like so we were saying before, if you don't become digital, you're going to get left behind. But at the same time, prioritizing those digital investments specifically around areas that are going to improve your customer experience and take cost out over the next few years, those are going to help you win. And those are the trends we're seeing in the marketplace too. So.
Yeah, that's a great wrap up to the discussion. I think really good words of wisdom. We are at the top of the hour. Let me finish up now with, if you have not gotten the actual survey report. This is available if you can access the results within the M2030 project on the MLC website. It's there for you. We recommend that you get the whole thing and read about it. As I mentioned earlier, our upcoming event in Nashville under the Manufacturing in 2030 project, where we're going to be completely focused, totally focused on AI's implications for manufacturing and operations in the workforce, on the ethics side. A whole host of AI related topics are going to be discussed with experts in Nashville. So if this is not on your radar screen now, or you haven't registered for this, please do. This is not a tomorrow discussion. This is a now discussion. So get yourself to Nashville and learn all you can about AI, because it is front and center in terms of competitiveness. Next slide, Lauren. And finally, thank you to our great panelists for joining us today and discussing the M2030 project survey results. And thank you all for joining us at the audience level for this. We are obviously continuing the discussion on manufacturing in 2030, as we will be in 2023 as the project continues. So thank you for joining us. I'm David Brosell from the Manufacturing Leadership Council. We look forward to seeing you on a future MLC event. Bye-bye now and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.